Sometimes the smallest act of kindness quietly rewrites the rest of your life. The rain had already turned the lonely stretch of State Route 47 into a ribbon of silver when Ethan Brooks noticed the black Mercedes SUV resting on the narrow shoulder with its hazard lights blinking through the storm. Most drivers slowed for a second, looked, and kept going. Some had meetings waiting. Others had families expecting them home. Ethan had both responsibilities too, yet his old blue pickup drifted gently onto the shoulder as though kindness had become a habit long before convenience ever had. He shut off the engine, reached behind the seat for his weathered toolbox, and pulled the hood of his faded work jacket over his head before stepping into the steady rain. The cold water soaked through his jeans within seconds, but he barely noticed. His attention settled on the woman standing beside the damaged tire. She looked composed despite the weather, dressed in an elegant navy business suit now dotted with rain, one hand gripping a phone that displayed nothing but a frustrating message: no service. She glanced toward him cautiously as he approached, her gray eyes measuring the stranger walking through the rain with a toolbox instead of questions. "Looks like you picked the worst place in the county for a flat tire," Ethan said with an easy smile. She exhaled the first hint of relief she had shown in several minutes. "I was beginning to think nobody would stop." Ethan knelt beside the wheel, inspecting the tire before speaking again. "You've got a nasty puncture. Nothing to worry about. Your spare will get you safely into town." "Can I pay you?" she asked almost automatically. Ethan shook his head while loosening the first lug nut with practiced confidence. "Let's get you back on the road first." The only sounds between them became the rhythmic click of the lug wrench, the soft patter of rain against pavement, and distant thunder rolling across the hills. The air carried the scent of wet pine, fresh asphalt, and engine heat fading into the cool afternoon. Victoria Hayes watched silently as the stranger worked with calm efficiency that suggested years of experience. There was nothing rushed about his movements, nothing performed to impress. He simply did what needed to be done. She had spent years surrounded by executives who measured every favor against future returns. This man hadn't even asked her name. Ethan lifted the spare into place, tightened each lug nut carefully, then lowered the vehicle back onto the pavement. He wiped his hands with an old shop towel before standing. "There you go. Drive under 50 until you can replace the tire." Victoria reached into her designer handbag and pulled out 5 crisp $100 bills. "Please, at least let me thank you properly." Ethan smiled gently and folded her hand back around the money without counting it. "Your thank you is enough." She blinked, surprised. People don't usually refuse money. Ethan looked toward the framed photograph tucked inside his pickup, where a smiling little girl in a softball uniform beamed beside him. His voice remained quiet but certain. "My daughter remembers kindness a lot longer than she remembers money. I'd rather she hears that her dad helped someone because it was the right thing to do." Victoria followed his eyes to the photograph, and for just a moment the relentless pace of her carefully managed world seemed to fall completely silent. She had built billion-dollar strategies, negotiated impossible contracts, and commanded boardrooms filled with powerful people, yet standing beside a rain-soaked highway, watching a single father climb back into an aging pickup without asking for anything in return, she felt as though she had just witnessed a kind of wealth no balance sheet had ever been able to measure. As Ethan started his engine and prepared to leave, neither of them could have imagined that a flat tire on an ordinary rainy afternoon had quietly become the first page of a story that would change both of their lives forever. Victoria drove another 20 miles before the rain finally softened into a light mist, yet her thoughts never left the quiet mechanic who had disappeared down the highway without even asking her name. She had spent nearly 15 years building one of the largest transportation companies in the country, and during that time she had met investors, politicians, celebrities, and executives who always seemed to want something. Ethan Brooks had wanted nothing at all. That simple truth unsettled her more than any difficult negotiation ever had. The following morning, the glass walls of Hayes Mobility reflected the bright Chicago sunrise as assistants hurried through polished hallways carrying tablets, reports, and coffee. Victoria entered the boardroom wearing the same calm expression she always carried into business meetings, but her attention drifted every few minutes toward the rain-speckled window overlooking the city. Numbers filled the presentation screen. Market projections, fleet expansions, quarterly profits. She heard every word, yet somehow none of them stayed with her. During a short break, her chief operations officer approached with a folder. We found the nearest repair shop if you still want to replace the damaged tire before your trip tomorrow. Victoria shook her head gently. I already know someone who can do it. The executive looked surprised. Someone you trust? Victoria paused before answering with a small smile. I think I do. 2 hours later, her Mercedes rolled into the quiet farming town, where Ethan's modest garage stood beside an old brick building with faded blue paint and a weathered wooden sign that simply read Brooks Auto Repair. There were no expensive waiting rooms, no polished marble floors, only the comforting smell of fresh coffee, clean motor oil, and honest work. Wind chimes hanging near the entrance moved softly in the afternoon breeze, while classic country music played from an old radio sitting on a dusty shelf. Ethan was underneath a pickup truck when he heard tires crunch across the gravel lot. He rolled out slowly, wiping his hands with the same faded shop towel. His expression remained exactly as calm as it had been beside the highway. Looks like your spare got you here, he said. Victoria laughed quietly. Just barely. Then we should fix it before it decides to leave you stranded again. There was no excitement in his voice after seeing the luxury vehicle parked outside his tiny garage. No nervousness. No attempt to impress her. He simply walked toward the damaged tire and examined it with careful attention. You picked up a long roofing nail, he explained. The sidewall is damaged, so replacing it is the safest option. Do you always explain everything before fixing a car? She asked. Ethan nodded while reaching for his tools. People deserve to understand what they are paying for. Victoria folded her arms and watched him work. Yesterday you did not charge me anything. Ethan smiled without looking up. Yesterday you needed help. Today you need service. Those are different things. She found herself smiling back. The steady rhythm of the impact wrench echoed through the open garage, while warm sunlight slipped between the clouds and stretched across the concrete floor. For the first time in months, Victoria realized she was not thinking about deadlines, shareholders, or contracts. She was simply enjoying the peaceful silence shared with a man whose confidence came not from wealth or status, but from quiet dignity. Neither of them noticed the small blonde girl stepping out of the office carrying 2 paper cups of lemonade until her cheerful voice filled the garage. Dad, I made extra because I thought your customer might be thirsty. Ethan looked up with gentle pride shining in his eyes, and Victoria suddenly understood that the richest part of this little garage had never been the tools inside it. The little girl walked carefully across the concrete floor, balancing 2 paper cups with both hands as though delivering something priceless instead of homemade lemonade. Her long blonde ponytail swayed with each small step, and the smile on her face carried the effortless warmth that only children seemed able to give away so freely. Ethan accepted 1 cup before nodding toward Victoria. This is my daughter, Lily. The little girl offered the 2nd cup with complete confidence. Dad says lemonade makes every day a little better. Victoria accepted it with a quiet laugh. Then I think I needed this today. Lily smiled proudly. I made it myself. I even squeezed all the lemons. Ethan raised 1 eyebrow. With just a little help. Only because the jar was too high. Lily corrected, making. Both adults laugh. The sound lingered inside the garage longer than anyone expected. Sunlight poured through the open bay door, catching tiny particles of dust floating lazily through the air, while a gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass from the neighboring field. Somewhere beyond the garage a lawn mower hummed in the distance, blending with the steady chirping of late afternoon birds. It was a peaceful rhythm that felt completely foreign to Victoria. Her life was usually measured by ringing phones, elevator chimes, and endless calendar reminders. Here, time seemed to breathe at a slower pace. Ethan finished installing the new tire before lowering the vehicle carefully to the ground. He inspected each lug nut 1 final time, then stood and wiped his hands clean. You are ready to go. Victoria looked toward the office where family photographs rested on an old bookshelf beside a collection of trophies from local softball tournaments. 1 picture caught her attention. Ethan stood beside Lily at what looked like an elementary school science fair, both of them laughing so hard that neither appeared to notice the camera. She keeps you busy, Victoria said softly. Ethan followed her gaze and smiled. She keeps me grateful. Lily leaned against her father without saying a word, completely comfortable in the quiet moment they shared. Victoria noticed how naturally he rested one hand on his daughter's shoulder, not out of habit, but out of reassurance, as though he wanted her to know she would never face the world alone. It was such a simple gesture, yet it carried more meaning than any speech she had heard inside a corporate conference room. "Do you work here every day?" Lily asked curiously. Victoria hesitated before answering. "Most days I work in an office." "That sounds boring," Lily replied honestly. Ethan chuckled. "Lily." The little girl shrugged. "It does. Dad gets to fix things." Victoria smiled. "Sometimes I try to fix things too. They are just different kinds of problems." Lily considered that answer carefully before nodding. "Then maybe you and my dad have the same job." The innocence of the observation settled over the garage like gentle sunlight. Ethan and Victoria exchanged a brief glance, neither knowing quite what to say. Before leaving, Victoria reached for her wallet once more, but Ethan raised a hand with a knowing smile. "This time I am sending you an invoice, remember?" She laughed, relieved to hear him say it. "Then I will gladly pay it." As she climbed into her Mercedes, she looked back through the windshield. Ethan had already returned to organizing his tools while Lily followed him from one workbench to another, asking endless questions that he answered with endless patience. Victoria remained parked for several quiet seconds before starting the engine. She told herself she had only come to replace a tire. Yet as the garage disappeared in her rearview mirror, she realized she was leaving with something far more unexpected. For the first time in years, she found herself wondering not when she needed another repair, but when she might find a reason to come back. Over the next 2 weeks, Victoria discovered that finding reasons to drive through the little farming town became strangely effortless. One afternoon, it was a question about the new tires. Another day, it was a faint sound she claimed she heard near the brakes. Once it was simply because she wanted Ethan to check whether everything still looked good after a long highway trip. Every explanation sounded perfectly reasonable, yet deep inside, she knew the real destination had never been the garage. It had always been the quiet peace waiting inside it. Ethan never questioned why she kept returning. He greeted her with the same easy smile each time, accepted the keys, inspected the vehicle carefully, and explained every detail with patient honesty. If nothing needed to be repaired, he said so. If something could wait another few thousand miles, he never suggested replacing it early. Victoria had built a career negotiating contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and she had learned that trust was often the rarest currency in business. Somehow the man wearing faded work boots possessed more of it than many executives she had known for decades. One crisp Saturday morning, the annual Community Harvest Festival filled the town. Square with colorful tents, local musicians, and the comforting smell of cinnamon, fresh bread, and smoked barbecue drifting through the cool autumn air. Children laughed as they chased one another between handmade craft booths, while old friends greeted each other as though no time had passed since the previous festival. Victoria had almost turned her car around twice before finally parking near the courthouse. She felt oddly nervous, not because of a business presentation or an important interview, but because she hoped to see one mechanic and his daughter enjoying an ordinary weekend. She found them beside a booth where Lily was carefully painting a small wooden birdhouse with bright yellow flowers. Ethan stood nearby holding 2 cups of hot apple cider while quietly admiring every brushstroke, as though his daughter were creating a priceless masterpiece. Lily looked up first and waved enthusiastically. "Miss Victoria, you came." Victoria smiled. "It looks like I did." Ethan handed her one of the warm cups without hesitation. "The church stand always makes too much cider. I figured someone should help us." She accepted it gratefully, wrapping both hands around the warm paper cup as the sweet scent of apples and cinnamon drifted upward with the steam. Together they wandered through the festival without any plan at all. They stopped to watch a local bluegrass band playing beneath strings of white lights. They sampled homemade pie from a family bakery that had served the town for 3 generations. Lily insisted everyone compete in a beanbag toss game, celebrating just as loudly when Victoria missed the target as when Ethan landed a perfect throw. The afternoon unfolded with remarkable simplicity, and yet every ordinary moment seemed to carry quiet meaning. Victoria noticed how many people greeted Ethan by name. Farmers thanked him for repairing old trucks during harvest season. Elderly couples waved from across the street. Children ran toward him without hesitation because they knew he would always stop to listen. Respect had found him long before success ever could. As the golden evening light settled across the town, Victoria realized something she had not expected. The happiest hours she had experienced in years had passed without a single business call, without checking the market, and without anyone knowing she was the chief executive officer of a billion-dollar company. Beside Ethan and Lily, she was simply another person sharing laughter beneath an autumn sky. And for the first time in a very long while, that felt wonderfully enough. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and cool autumn air, but the peaceful rhythm that had quietly grown between Ethan and Victoria was about to face its first unexpected test. Victoria returned to the downtown headquarters of Hayes Mobility before sunrise, greeting employees with her usual confidence as elevators carried executives toward another busy day of meetings. Everything appeared normal until her assistant hurried into the conference room, carrying a tablet with an uneasy expression. "Victoria, I think you should see this." A photograph filled the screen. It showed Victoria laughing beside Ethan and Lily at the Harvest Festival while the afternoon sun glowed behind them. Someone had posted it on social media with an innocent caption about community volunteers enjoying the weekend. Within hours, local news websites had copied the image, and curious readers quickly began asking who the man standing beside the famous chief executive officer might be. Victoria looked at the picture for several quiet seconds. She did not seem embarrassed. Instead, she found herself smiling at the memory of that afternoon. Across town, Ethan knew nothing about the growing attention. His garage doors stood open as morning sunlight stretched across the concrete floor. A retired farmer waited patiently while Ethan rotated the tires on an aging pickup truck. Lily sat inside the small office, finishing her homework before school, occasionally looking up to wave whenever another familiar customer arrived. Life continued exactly as it always had until a black luxury sedan slowly pulled into the gravel parking lot. Two sharply dressed men stepped out carrying leather briefcases instead of toolboxes. One adjusted his expensive tie before speaking politely. "Good morning. Is this Brooks Auto Repair?" Ethan nodded. "It is." The second man smiled. "We work with Hayes Mobility. We were hoping to speak with you for a few minutes." Ethan invited them inside without hesitation. They glanced around the modest garage with obvious surprise. There were no modern displays, no corporate branding, only carefully organized tools, family photographs, and years of honest work reflected in every worn workbench. "Miss Hayes has become quite popular in the news recently," one man explained carefully. "Some investors have questions after seeing photographs of the two of you together." Ethan listened quietly without interrupting. "They are wondering whether your relationship could create unnecessary public speculation." Ethan wiped his hands with the familiar blue shop towel before answering. "Victoria is my customer and my friend. That is all anyone needs to know." The visitors exchanged uncertain looks. They had expected defensiveness, perhaps excitement over the attention. Instead, they found a man who seemed almost completely uninterested in public opinion. After they left, Lily walked out of the office carrying her backpack. "Dad, were those people mad?" Ethan knelt beside her and smiled gently. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups worry too much about what other people think." Lily slipped her small hand into his. "You always tell me that being kind is more important than being popular." Ethan nodded. "And I still believe that." Several miles away, Victoria stared through the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office as Chicago traffic flowed far below. Her phone continued vibrating with messages from board members, reporters, and business partners asking the same questions in different words. Yet none of those voices stayed with her. The only words she could still hear were spoken inside a quiet garage by a man who had never asked for recognition. She suddenly realized that the greatest challenge ahead would not be convincing the world about Ethan Brooks. It would be convincing the world that genuine kindness still existed, even when no one believed it could. The following Friday began with silence, but it was the kind of silence that often arrives before life quietly changes. Direction. Ethan unlocked the garage just after sunrise, rolled the large doors open, and breathed in the familiar scent of cool morning air mixed with motor oil and fresh coffee. Lily sat inside the office finishing a spelling assignment before school, humming softly while the old radio played classic country songs in the background. Everything about the morning felt ordinary, yet only a few miles away another conversation was unfolding that would soon reach them both. Victoria sat at the head of the long walnut conference table overlooking the Chicago skyline, while the members of the Hayes Mobility Board reviewed reports spread neatly before them. No one mentioned quarterly profits first. No one discussed new technology or expansion plans. Instead, the chairman folded his hands and spoke carefully. Victoria, we need to address the public attention surrounding your friendship with the mechanic. Another executive nodded. Several investors are asking questions. The financial press has started connecting your name with his. A third voice joined quietly. We believe it would be best if you created some distance until the story fades. Victoria remained calm. Distance from what? The room grew still. From someone who has shown me nothing except honesty? No one answered immediately. The chairman finally cleared his throat. Perception matters. You represent this company. Victoria looked around the room at faces she had known for years. Character matters even more. The meeting ended without agreement, leaving an uncomfortable silence behind as executives slowly gathered their papers. Victoria walked toward the window overlooking the city, realizing that the higher she had climbed in business, the fewer people seemed to understand the simple value of genuine kindness. At almost the same moment, a black sport utility vehicle stopped outside Brooks Auto Repair. Victoria stepped out wearing a simple cream-colored sweater instead of a business suit. She carried no briefcase, no assistants, and no security team. Ethan looked up from replacing a battery and smiled. Good morning. Good morning, she replied, though her voice carried a quiet heaviness he had never heard before. He noticed it immediately. Something happened. She gave a small nod. The board wants me to stop seeing you. Ethan set down the wrench in his hand without showing surprise. He simply leaned lightly against the workbench and listened. They think people will misunderstand, Victoria continued. They believe appearances are more important than truth. Ethan remained silent for a few thoughtful seconds before speaking. They are trying to protect the company. Victoria looked at him in disbelief. You are defending them? Ethan smiled gently. I am trying to understand them. The breeze carried dry autumn leaves across the gravel lot, while sunlight filtered through the maple trees surrounding the garage. Somewhere nearby, a church bell rang the late morning hour, its peaceful sound lingering in the crisp air. Victoria lowered her eyes. I do not want to lose this friendship because other people make assumptions. Ethan looked toward the office where Lily was carefully arranging homework inside her backpack. His expression softened. Sometimes loving something means refusing to let it become another person's burden. Victoria frowned slightly. What does that mean? Ethan took a slow breath before answering. It means I never wanted my quiet life to become another challenge you had to fight. His words were spoken without sadness, without resentment, only with the quiet dignity that had first made her stop on a rainy highway. Victoria suddenly realized that while everyone else had been calculating risks, Ethan had been thinking only about protecting her peace. In that simple moment, she understood something few people ever learn. Real strength does not demand sacrifice from the people it loves. Sometimes it quietly becomes the sacrifice instead. 3 days passed without a single message, and the silence felt heavier than either of them expected. Ethan buried himself in work, repairing family sedans, pickup trucks, and aging farm equipment from sunrise until late afternoon. He smiled at every customer, helped every neighbor, and never once complained, but Lily noticed the difference. Her father paused more often between jobs, stared a little longer toward the empty highway, and drank his morning coffee after it had already grown cold. He never spoke Victoria's name, yet the quiet inside the garage seemed to whisper it anyway. Across the state, Victoria threw herself into meetings that suddenly felt meaningless. Every presentation blurred together. Every contract sounded the same. She answered questions with the same professionalism that had made her one of the country's most respected chief executive officers. But her heart was somewhere else entirely. On Thursday evening, unable to ignore the feeling any longer, she asked her longtime executive assistant, Margaret, to help her learn more about Ethan. Margaret had worked beside Victoria for nearly 20 years and knew the difference between curiosity and something much deeper. She quietly gathered public records, local newspaper archives, and community articles before placing a slim folder on Victoria's desk the following morning. Victoria expected to find little more than business licenses and tax documents. Instead, the first newspaper clipping stopped her completely. Nearly 11 years earlier, Ethan had been recognized as one of the most promising automotive engineers in the Midwest after designing an innovative fuel efficiency system for commercial vehicles. Another article described how a national manufacturing company had offered him an executive engineering position with an impressive salary, relocation assistance, and stock options. Victoria turned the page, confused. If he had been given opportunities like these, why was he running a small garage in a farming town? The answer appeared in a local human interest story published several months later. Ethan's wife had passed away unexpectedly after a brief illness, leaving him to raise their infant daughter alone. Rather than move across the country and spend long weeks traveling, he declined every prestigious offer, returned to his hometown, and reopened his late father's modest repair shop so he could be present for every school morning, every bedtime story, every scraped knee, and every birthday candle. Victoria felt her eyes linger on a photograph of a much younger Ethan holding a tiny blonde baby while standing beside the same garage that still welcomed neighbors every day. Beneath the picture, one sentence from an interview caught her breath. A reporter had asked whether he regretted walking away from a remarkable career. Ethan had answered simply, "Success can always be earned again. Childhood cannot be lived twice." Victoria slowly closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. The afternoon sunlight stretched across her office floor while the city moved endlessly below, yet everything around her suddenly felt very small. She had spent years believing sacrifice meant working longer hours, accepting greater responsibility, and carrying impossible expectations. Ethan had taught her another definition entirely. Real sacrifice was choosing love when no one applauded, choosing family when ambition offered easier roads, and giving away dreams so someone else could keep smiling. A quiet tear slipped down her cheek before she even realized it had formed. In that peaceful office overlooking one of the busiest cities in America, Victoria finally understood why every moment beside Ethan had felt different. She had never admired him because he fixed her car. She admired him because he had quietly built a life where character mattered more than achievement. And for the first time in many years, she knew exactly the kind of future she wanted to fight for. The next Monday morning, the board gathered once again inside the top-floor conference room, expecting another discussion about public image, investor confidence, and media attention. Instead, Victoria entered carrying only a slim folder and a calm expression that none of them could quite read. The room fell silent as she placed the folder in the center of the polished table. "Before we continue," she said softly, "I would like everyone to read something." One by one, the directors opened the newspaper article about Ethan's decision years earlier. They read about the engineering career he had willingly left behind, the opportunities he had declined, and the promise he had made to never allow his daughter to grow up wondering whether work mattered more than family. No one spoke while the pages slowly turned. The silence inside the room felt different from previous meetings. It was no longer the silence of disagreement. It was the silence of reflection. Finally, the chairman looked up. "We did not know any of this." Victoria nodded gently. "That is because he never told anyone. He has never tried to impress people. He simply lives the values we spend millions of dollars advertising." No one argued. Several directors quietly lowered their eyes. The conversation shifted from reputation to integrity, from appearances to character. Although concerns about the media remained, something important had changed. They no longer saw Ethan as a headline. They saw him as a father. Hundreds of miles away, Ethan was preparing to close the garage for the afternoon when Lily ran in carrying a large envelope decorated with colorful flowers she had drawn herself. "Dad, I forgot to give this to Miss Victoria." Ethan smiled. "What is it?" Lily shrugged. "I made it yesterday. I thought maybe she was having a sad week." Inside the envelope was a simple drawing. It showed 3 people standing beside the old blue pickup and the black Mercedes beneath a bright autumn sky. Above them, Lily had carefully written in large, uneven letters, "Families are the people who help each other smile." Ethan stared at the drawing for several quiet moments before placing it carefully back inside the envelope. "Would you like to deliver it after school?" Lily's face lit up immediately. "Can we?" "I think we can." Late that afternoon, Ethan and Lily drove into Chicago for the first time together in months. The towering buildings seemed almost unreal compared to the peaceful roads surrounding their hometown. When they arrived at Hayes Mobility headquarters, Employees looked curiously toward the father and daughter walking through the marble lobby. Lily held the envelope tightly with both hands while Ethan remained his usual calm self, greeting the receptionist with quiet kindness. Word quickly reached Victoria, who stepped out of the executive elevator expecting another business visitor. Instead, she saw Lily running toward her with a joyful smile. "Miss Victoria, this is for you." Victoria knelt to accept the envelope. As she unfolded the drawing, her eyes filled with tears almost instantly. She smiled through them as she looked at the three figures standing together beneath Lily's bright yellow sun. "It is beautiful," she whispered. Lily hugged her without hesitation. "Dad says pictures help people remember important things." Victoria looked toward Ethan, who simply smiled with the same quiet warmth that had first greeted her beside a lonely highway. In that single innocent drawing, Lily had accomplished what endless meetings and complicated conversations never could. She reminded everyone that the strongest connections are rarely built by wealth, titles, or influence. They are built one small act of kindness at a time, until strangers quietly begin to feel like home. 1 year later, the little garage at the edge of town looked different, but somehow it still felt exactly the same. The faded wooden sign had been carefully restored instead of replaced. Fresh blue paint covered the walls, new service bays stood beside the original building, and a training workshop welcomed young mechanics who wanted to learn both the trade and the values that had quietly shaped Ethan Brooks for so many years. At the entrance hung a simple plaque that read, "Character first, skill second." No corporate logo appeared anywhere on the property. No publicity banners celebrated its success. The people who worked there already knew what mattered most. Every Saturday morning, Ethan taught apprentices how to repair engines with patience, honesty, and respect. He reminded them that every customer carried a story they could not see and that every repair was ultimately about helping another family arrive home safely. The lessons always ended the same way. Fix the person's trust before you fix the vehicle. The young mechanics wrote down every word. A few miles away, Hayes Mobility continued to thrive under Victoria's leadership. The board had never asked her again to distance herself from Ethan. Instead, several directors had quietly visited the garage themselves, discovering that integrity often produced stronger partnerships than polished presentations ever could. Victoria never announced that. She had personally financed the expansion of the training center. She insisted every document remain anonymous because she knew Ethan would never have accepted the gift if it had been offered for recognition. When reporters occasionally asked why the company supported technical education in small communities, she simply answered, "Because the future deserves people who know how to work with both their hands and their hearts." On a warm spring afternoon, the familiar black Mercedes rolled gently into the first service bay. Ethan smiled as he recognized it immediately. "Regular maintenance?" he asked with a playful grin. Victoria laughed softly. "I finally found a reason that is actually true." Lily, now a little taller and carrying a stack of school books, hurried out of the office the moment she heard the engine. "Miss Victoria." She wrapped her arms around Victoria in a joyful hug that felt completely natural. Victoria embraced her just as warmly before brushing a loose strand of blonde hair away from Lily's face. "Someone has been growing much too fast." Lily smiled brightly. "Dad says that is what happens when people are happy." Ethan looked at the two of them, and the quiet gratitude in his eyes said more than words ever could. After the inspection was finished, the three of them walked outside where the old blue pickup remained parked beneath the large maple tree that had shaded the garage for decades. Hanging proudly on the inside wall, just above the original workbench, was a worn tire with a small brass plate beneath it. Victoria looked at it curiously. Ethan smiled. "I kept it." "The flat tire?" she asked. He nodded. "It reminded me that ordinary days sometimes carry extraordinary beginnings." Victoria reached for his hand, and this time neither of them felt the need to hide what had quietly grown between them. Lily slipped her small hand into both of theirs, smiling toward the road where their story had unknowingly begun. The afternoon breeze stirred the leaves overhead, while sunlight settled gently across the garage, the pickup, the Mercedes, and the family they had never expected to become. In the end, it was never money that changed their lives. It was a single act of kindness offered without expectation, a quiet heart that refused to measure people by status, and the simple truth that love often arrives disguised as an ordinary moment on an ordinary road. waiting only for someone willing to stop and help. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more stories of courage, kindness, and second chances, because the people the world overlooks often leave the greatest impact.